Don't move!
No, please!
Back off! Back off!
The third bullet didn't hurt. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting shot. The first one stills your breath, the second stills your balance, and the third one just feels like silence. Amara Osei was 23, wearing a stiff white uniform that smelled like bleach and someone else's ambition, carrying a silver tray she'd been told never to tilt when she saw the gun. Not pointed at her, pointed at the boy beside her, Kwon Tae-young, 19 years old, only son of the most feared man in Seoul, who had spent the last 20 minutes quietly stealing shrimp off her tray like he didn't own half the building. She didn't think, her legs just moved. You don't decide to step in front of a bullet. Your body just quietly concludes that your life is worth less, and in that moment, hers agreed. She hit the marble floor before she heard the screaming. Cold. The floor was shockingly cold, which was strange because the ballroom had been suffocating all night, perfume, cigarette smoke, and old money baking under chandelier heat. Tae-young's face appeared above her, pale, mouth open, making no sound at all. And then his father arrived. Kwon Jae-yun didn't run. Men like him don't run. He crossed that ballroom like the crowd already knew to move, crouched beside her, and looked at her the way people look at things they've already decided to keep. His voice was quiet, not gentle, certain. He turned to the doctor frozen behind him and said exactly 4 words. 4 words that would completely destroy and rebuild Amara's entire life. She is my wife. She woke up in a private hospital, tubes in her arm, a ring on her finger she never agreed to, her patient file bearing a surname she'd never carried. The room held 12 bouquets of white roses, arranged by someone with too much money and no idea what comfort actually looked like. And in the corner, still as a piece of furniture, sat Kwon Jae-hyun, not sleeping, not on his phone, just watching the city below like Seoul owed him an explanation. She pulled the ring off and held it out. He didn't move. I'm not your wife. He turned and looked at her the way a man looks at a locked door he already has the key to. You are until you're safe. 3 nurses had already told her not to upset him. The head surgeon had said the same, then immediately glanced at the plaque on the wall that now read Kwon Family Pavilion, donated 48 hours ago while she was unconscious. Here's what nobody in that hospital said out loud, but everybody understood. This man had restructured an entire wing of a medical facility overnight, not to impress her, not to perform generosity, but because it was the fastest way to guarantee her care fell under his authority. That's not romance, that's architecture. And Amara, lying there with 3 bullets worth of damage in her body and a stranger's name on her chart, was only just beginning to understand that she hadn't stepped in front of a gun. She'd stepped into something much harder to walk away from. But here's what should actually be bothering you right now, and this is the detail everyone misses. Why was there a shooter at that gala in the first place? And why, when Kwon Jae-yun knelt beside a bleeding woman on the floor of his own event, did he look like a man who had already prepared for exactly this moment? Most people who click this are already subscribed because they've been here before and they know how this channel works. If you're new and you don't subscribe right now, the algorithm will bury this story and you will never find your way back to it. Hit subscribe, keep watching. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fresh roses. Amara woke up to a ring on her left hand, a stranger's surname on her patient file, and a nurse who wouldn't make eye contact. That last part scared her more than the bullets, because nurses see everything, and this one had clearly decided that whatever was happening in this room was above her pay grade. Kwon Jae-yun was sitting by the window when she found her voice. Not sleeping, not on his phone, just watching the city below like Seoul owed him an explanation. She yanked the ring off and held it out. He didn't move. I'm not your wife. He turned and looked at her the way a man looks at a locked door he already has the key to. You are until you're safe. 3 nurses had already told her not to upset him. The head surgeon had said the same, then immediately glanced at the plaque on the wall that now read Kwon Family Pavilion, donated 48 hours ago while she was unconscious. The audacity should have been her first red flag. It wasn't even her second. Here's the detail that cracked her open. When Amara asked to call her brother, Kofi, 20 years old, diabetic, living alone in a 2-room apartment in Mapogu, Jae-yun handed her a phone already unlocked to Kofi's contact. He'd already checked on him, already sent someone, not to threaten, to deliver a month's supply of insulin, a new fridge to store it, and a phone with Jae-yun's private number saved under emergency. Amara stared at that screen and felt the ground shift beneath her hospital bed, because kindness from a man like this isn't warmth, it's architecture. He was building something around her, one careful brick at a time, and the terrifying part was it didn't feel like a cage yet. Comment trapped if you already see where this is going. Tae-young visited that afternoon, 19, tall, hoodie pulled low, takeout bag in hand, looking absolutely nothing like the son of Seoul's most feared man. He set the bag down, tteokbokki, 2 portions like he'd known her order, and sat without asking permission. He looked at his father's empty chair, then back at her, and said quietly, "He doesn't do this." She asked what he meant. He didn't answer immediately, just turned the takeout container in his hands, choosing his words with the specific care of someone carrying information too heavy for casual conversation. "He didn't even do this for my mother." Then his phone buzzed, his face closed like a curtain drawn fast, and he was gone, leaving one question burning so hot in her chest she could barely breathe around it. What happened to his mother? Kwon Jae-yun returned at 9 p.m. Set a single document on her table, residency papers, name update, a security detail schedule, then straightened his jacket and waited. She looked up. "You planned this." For one fraction of a second, something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt, something older and heavier than guilt. He said, "I planned for the possibility, there's a difference." He left before she could tell him there really truly wasn't. The estate had one rule nobody wrote down, but everybody knew. You did not ask about the portrait at the top of the stairs. A woman, beautiful, dark hair, cold eyes, and a smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror for years before it was ever used on a person. Amara walked past it her first morning and felt the whole hallway go quiet. Not peaceful quiet, held breath quiet. The kind that means everyone already knows the answer and nobody wants to be the one to say it. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Yoon, 60-something, spine like a ruler, zero tolerance for softness, handed Amara a schedule without greeting her. Breakfast at 7, security briefing at 8, no leaving the grounds without a 2-hour notice and an approved route. Amara laughed, actually laughed out loud. Mrs. Yoon did not blink. "You think this is excessive," she said, folding her hands. "The last person who thought security was excessive is why you're standing in this house right now." The laughter stopped. The hallway felt 2 feet shorter. Tae-young found her on the back terrace that evening, staring at nothing. He dropped down beside her without asking, handed her banana milk, the cheap convenience store kind, condensation already cold against her fingers, which was the most human gesture anyone in that house had managed since she arrived. She asked him straight, "Who is she, the woman in the portrait?" His jaw tightened. He took a long sip, said nothing for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "My mother." A pause that had weight to it. She didn't die in an accident, no matter what the official story says. He stood up, hands in his pockets, and walked inside, leaving Amara on those steps holding a cold bottle, a cracked open secret, and the very specific feeling of someone who has just been handed a grenade without a manual. Jae-hyun found her still there an hour later. He didn't ask what Tae-young had told her. This man always already knew. He sat beside her, which surprised her, and said nothing for a long moment. The garden lights hummed. Seoul kept moving beyond the walls, loud and completely indifferent to what was happening inside them. Then he said, "She made enemies I couldn't protect her from." Not a confession, not a plea, a warning dressed up as a memory. Amara felt it settle in her chest like cold water. Are those same enemies the ones who sent the shooter at the gala? His silence was the loudest yes she'd ever heard. Some men lie with words. This one told the truth with the spaces between them. That night, Amara lay in a room that cost more than her entire childhood, staring at a ceiling she didn't choose, wearing a name that wasn't hers, and made a decision that would either save her or detonate everything. She picked up Jae-hyun's phone, scrolled past Kofi's number, past the security team's contact, and stopped on a name she didn't recognize, saved with no title, no explanation, just 4 words in lowercase, like a whispered warning: "Do not call this." She called it. The phone rang twice. Then a woman's voice, low, unhurried, the kind of calm that only comes from people who have nothing left to lose, said, "I wondered when he'd let someone find this number." Amara's grip tightened. "Who are you?" A pause, the sound of wind on the other end, traffic, somewhere open. Then, "I'm the woman in that portrait, and if you're calling me, it means my husband forgot to delete this contact, which means he's getting sloppy, which means you're in far more danger than he's told you." Amara's feet hit the cold floor before her brain caught up, heart loud, room suddenly too big. She pressed her back against the wall and kept her voice below a whisper. "You're supposed to be dead." The woman made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. That's exactly what he needed everyone to believe, including Tae-young. That last part, including Tae-young, landed like a slap. This woman's son believed she was gone, had been grieving her, had built walls around himself because of her, and she had let him. Amara felt something shift inside her, something that wasn't fear anymore. It was anger, clean and cold. Drop your favorite emoji in the comments if you already knew something was off about that portrait. The woman's name was Se-yeon-hee. She spoke in careful, measured sentences, like someone who had rehearsed this conversation many times. She told Amara 3 things. 1, the shooter at the gala wasn't sent by Jae-hyun's enemies. 2, the marriage wasn't just protection. It was legal architecture designed to transfer something specific to Amara's name if Jae-hyun was ever arrested or killed. 3, there was a second target at that gala, not Tae-young. Before she could say the name, the line went silent. Not disconnected, silent. Someone had cut it. Amara lowered the phone. The room felt different now. Same walls, same expensive furniture, same Seoul skyline glowing through the curtains, but the air had weight. She turned around. Jae-hyun was standing in the doorway, jacket off, sleeves rolled, eyes on the phone in her hand, then on her face. He didn't look angry. That was the terrifying part. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, the kind of tired that lives in a person's bones after years of carrying something too heavy to put down. He said nothing, just held out his hand for the phone. She didn't give it. "You're supposed to be dead." Jae-hyun's jaw moved, once. "I know." "Tae-young doesn't." "I know." "Then you're going to tell him." Jae-hyun looked at her for a long moment, really looked, the way he hadn't since the hospital, and said something she was absolutely not prepared for. "She asked me not to." "She asked me not to." 4 words. Amara replayed them the entire night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the estate breathe around her. The creak of old wood, the distant hum of security monitors, the specific silence of a house full of secrets held too long. By 4 a.m., she'd made her decision. Some lies are too heavy to leave in someone else's hands, especially when that someone is a 19-year-old boy who cried in a hospital hallway thinking his mother never saw him grow up. She picked up the phone, then stopped. Jaehyun's security app was open on the screen. She'd accidentally brushed it, and the live camera feed showed something that made her go completely still. The front gate camera. A car, parked just outside. Engine off, lights off. It hadn't been there an hour ago. She found Tae-young in the kitchen at 6 a.m., bowl of ramen, headphones around his neck, textbook open to a page he clearly hadn't read. He looked up, registered her face. His spoon stopped moving. She sat across from him and placed the phone flat on the table. He looked at it, then at her. "I'm going to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to stay in this seat until I finish." His eyes dropped to the phone. Something in his face already knew, the way you always half know the truth you've been afraid to look for. His voice came out smaller than she'd ever heard it. "Is she alive?" Amara held his gaze and nodded once. The sound he made wasn't crying. It was something that had been trapped behind his ribs for 3 years, finally breaking the surface. Jaehyun walked in at 6:17 a.m., saw his son's shoulders shaking, saw Amara's hand on Taeyang's arm, saw the phone. His face didn't collapse. Men like him don't collapse. But something behind his eyes flickered and went out, like a light in a room you didn't know was still on. He pulled out the chair beside Taeyang and sat. No explanations, no speeches, just presence. And somehow that was the most human Amara had ever seen him. Comment finally if you've been waiting for this man to just sit down and be a father. Taeyang didn't scream, didn't throw anything. He asked one question, voice flat and precise. Was it your choice or hers? Jaehyung was quiet for 4 full seconds. Hers. Taeyang stood, walked to the window, pressed his forehead against the cold glass. His reflection stared back, jaw set, eyes wet, looking so much like his father it was painful to hold both of them in the same frame. Then he said 6 words that reframed everything. She called me last week too. The room went absolutely still, which meant Yanhee wasn't hiding and waiting. She was communicating, coordinating, moving pieces on a board nobody else could fully see yet. Jaehyun's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at the screen. Something shifted in his jaw, small, fast, controlled. He stood up without explaining, walked to the window beside Taeyang, and looked out at the front gate. The parked car from the overnight camera feed was gone, but in its place, on the gate post, was a single white envelope. No name, no stamp, just waiting. She called me last week too. 6 words. And just like that, every camera, every locked gate, every carefully managed silence Jaehyun had built meant nothing. His son had been speaking to his supposedly dead wife, in his own house, under his own roof. The expression on Jaehyun's face wasn't anger. It was the look of a man realizing the chessboard he'd been studying had a completely different game playing on the other side, and someone else had been moving pieces the whole time. Taeyang turned from the window, dry-eyed, steady in a way that 19-year-olds are not supposed to be steady. She told me not to tell you. No apology in it. She said she needed to know if you'd brought someone into this house before she made her next move. Amara felt the air leave her lungs. Before she made her next move. Not hiding, not running, positioned. The phone call hadn't been a scared woman reaching from the shadows. It was an audition, and Amara had performed without knowing she was on stage. Jaehyun walked to the kitchen counter, stood with his back to both of them, both hands flat on the marble, head down, the posture of a man doing rapid, private calculations nobody else was cleared to hear. When he turned, he looked directly at Amara. She contacted you because she wants something. What did she ask for? Amara opened her mouth, closed it, because Yanhee hadn't asked for anything. The line had been cut before she could, which now felt completely deliberate. Whatever Yanhee wanted, she didn't want Jaehyun hearing it first. She didn't ask for anything, Amara said. Jaehyun studied her face for a long, uncomfortable moment, then nodded once, like she just confirmed his worst suspicion. She will, and when she does, you come to me first. The estate went into quiet lockdown by noon. No announcement, just 3 additional security rotations, and Mrs. Yoon moving through every room, checking window latches with the focused energy of a woman who had seen this storm before and knew exactly how much it could take. Amara cornered her in the hallway. How many times has this happened? Mrs. Yoon didn't stop walking. Which part? The wife disappearing, the house going on alert, or a new woman being pulled into the middle of it? Amara grabbed her arm. There were others before me? Mrs. Yoon finally stopped, looked at her hand, then at her face. Her voice dropped. Not kind, not cruel, just precise. The last one left this house in an ambulance, and she knew exactly what she was signing up for. She let that land. You didn't. If something happens to Amara and you're not subscribed, you'll never know, and that will bother you more than you think. Subscribe. I'm not done with this story yet. 2 hours later, a sealed envelope slid under Amara's door. No name, no return address. She opened it. One photograph inside. Amara, Kofi, taken yesterday, outside his apartment in Mapogu. Whoever took it had been close enough to read the label on the insulin bag in his hand. Amara was through the door before she'd finished processing what she was holding. Down the hallway, both hands shaking, not from fear, from the specific white-hot fury of someone who has just understood that a line has been crossed that cannot be uncrossed. She found Jai-hyun in his office, phone already to his ear, and threw the photograph on his desk so hard it slid off the other side. He looked at it on the floor, then at her. He said something into the phone, 2 words, Korean, quiet, and ended the call. Kofi is not part of this. Her voice was barely above a whisper, which somehow made it louder. Fix it, right now, or I walk out of this house and take everything you've legally attached to my name with me. Jae-hyun picked the photograph up off the floor, studied it. His jaw moved once. This didn't come from my side. Amara stared at him. Then whose side did it come from? He set the photo down with the controlled precision of someone physically managing their own anger. Yunhee. The name landed like a key turning in a lock. Not his enemies, not a rival family. His own wife, his hidden wife, had sent a photograph of Amara's little brother as a message. Let that sit for a second. This woman faked her death, kept secret contact with her son, tested Amara like a chess piece, and is now holding a 20-year-old diabetic student over Amara's head like a bargaining chip. Comment monster or desperate, because the comments on this story are always split right down the middle. Tae-young appeared in the doorway behind her. He'd heard everything. The walls in that office were apparently not as solid as the rest of the estate's image. His face was unreadable in the way only deeply hurt people learn to be. She wouldn't hurt him. His voice had no confidence in it, just hope dressed up as certainty. Jae-hyun looked at his son for a long moment, the look of a father deciding how much truth a person can hold, and said nothing, which was its own answer. Tae-young stepped back from the doorway and sat on the hallway floor, just sat, back against the wall, knees up, 19 years old and learning in real time that the parent you grieve and the parent who actually existed are sometimes 2 completely different people. Amara called Kofi herself. 4 rings, 5, her throat tightening with each one. He picked up on the 6th, sleepy, confused, annoyed in the specific way of little brothers who get calls before noon on a Saturday. Nona, why? Pack a bag, she said. Not everything, just 3 days. I'm sending someone. Silence. Then, Amara, what's happening? She pressed her free hand flat against Jae-hyun's desk and steadied her breathing. Nothing you need to worry about yet, but Kofi, do not open the door for anyone except the man I send. Nobody else, not a neighbor, not a delivery person, nobody. Another silence, longer this time. Are you safe? She almost laughed, almost. I will be. The car was dispatched in 4 minutes. Jae-hyun handled it personally, called the team lead himself, gave coordinates, gave a description of Kofi, gave a specific instruction Amara didn't fully hear that made the team lead's entire posture change through the phone. She didn't ask what the instruction was. Some things you accept on credit. But as she stood in that office watching this man rearrange his entire security operation for a boy he'd never met, her brother, who had nothing to do with any of this, something cracked open in her chest that she absolutely was not ready for. She looked away before he could see it. He spoke without looking up from his phone. He's already being watched, has been since yesterday. She frowned. You knew? I suspected. He finally looked at Amara. I move before I'm certain. That's why I'm still alive. It was practical, cold even, but Kofi was safe. And in that house, on that day, safe was the only love language anyone had. She was already inside the estate when they found her. Not at the gate, not at the perimeter. Inside, sitting at the dining table, both hands wrapped around a cup of tea like she'd never left, wearing a gray coat that smelled like rain and a long journey. Yunhee in person was nothing like her portrait. The portrait had cold eyes. The woman at that table had tired ones. There's a difference. Cold means you don't feel. Tired means you felt too much for too long and ran out of places to put it. Mrs. Yoon was standing in the corner, arms folded, face completely unreadable, which told Amara everything. She'd known. probably let her in herself. Tae-young walked in 2 steps ahead of Amara, stopped so abruptly she nearly walked into his back, and made a sound she'd never heard from him before. Not a word, just sound, raw and small and completely unlike a 19-year-old who'd spent 3 years building walls. Yun-hee stood up, took 1 step toward him. He didn't move forward, didn't move back, just stood there holding 3 years of grief in his body like a man trying not to drop something irreplaceable. She said his name, once. He closed his eyes, and that was the most painful thing Amara had ever watched. Not crying, not screaming, just a boy standing still, because moving meant he had to decide what to do with all that love he'd buried. Jae-hyun arrived 4 minutes later. The temperature in the room dropped by 10 degrees. He stood in the doorway, took in the scene, his son, his wife, the tea, the gray coat, and his expression did something complicated that cycled through 3 emotions in under 2 seconds before settling into absolute stillness. You came here. Not a question. Yun-hee looked at Jae-hyun over Tae-young's shoulder. You brought a new variable into the equation without telling me. She meant Amara. Amara, standing in her own dining room, being referred to as a variable. Ma'am, some of us took actual bullets. Comment variable if you felt that personally on Amara's behalf. Yun-hee turned to Amara directly then. No preamble, no apology for the photograph, for the tests, for any of it. The shooter at the gala wasn't hired by a rival family. He was hired by someone inside this house, someone on Jae-hyun's own council, and they weren't trying to hit Tae-young. They were trying to hit you, Jae-hyun. Tae-young was standing in the way. She paused, let it settle. And the reason I faked my death 3 years ago, the reason I've been hiding, is because I found out who it was. She reached into her coat pocket and placed a single folded paper on the table. And it's someone currently sitting in this house. Jae-hyun didn't touch the paper. He looked at it for exactly 3 seconds, then raised his eyes to the only person in the room who hadn't been there the night of the gala, the only person who had access to every room, every schedule, every security rotation for the past decade. They both looked at the same time. Mrs. Yoon hadn't moved from her corner, but her hands, her perfectly folded, perfectly still hands, were shaking. Mrs. Yoon's hands stopped shaking the moment everyone looked at her. That was the tell. Panic shakes, guilt stills. She straightened her spine, that ruler-straight spine, smoothed the front of her uniform, and met Jae-hyun's eyes with the steady gaze of a woman who had been carrying a secret so long it had fused with her bones. The teacup on the table was still steaming. Nobody touched it, nobody moved. The entire room held its breath, the way rooms do when something irreversible is about to happen. Jae-hyun's voice came out quiet, not soft, quiet the way a blade is quiet before it moves. Myungja, her real name, not Mrs. Yoon, Myungja. She flinched at the sound of it, just slightly, like a person who had spent years making themselves smaller and had almost succeeded. He took 1 step toward her. Tell me it wasn't you. It wasn't a command. It was the last thing left of trust, extended 1 final time. She looked at him for a long moment, this man she'd served for over 2 decades, whose son she'd raised in every practical sense of the word, and said nothing, which was, in its own way, everything. Jae-hyun stopped walking. His jaw moved once. Set. Tell me it wasn't you. Harder this time. She closed her eyes. He has my daughter. No preamble, no defense. Just the truth arriving like something that had been pressed behind a door for too long. She spoke in careful, measured sentences, a woman finally allowed to put something heavy down. She'd had a daughter, young, illegitimate, hidden her whole life out of shame, out of survival, out of the specific terror of being a woman with a secret inside a house full of powerful men. Director Shim had found her anyway. 4 years ago, he'd given Mrs. Yoon simple instructions: feed him information, manage schedules, create gaps, or the daughter disappeared permanently. Give a thumbs up right now if you felt the floor move, because the woman you've been suspicious of this entire story just became the most tragic person in it. Tae-young made a sound, turned away, pressed his fist against his mouth. This woman had packed his lunch for 19 years, checked his temperature, stood outside his door when nightmares came, and had been quietly dismantling his family from the inside while doing all of it, not from malice, but from the oldest, most human thing in the world, a mother protecting her child. Jae-hyun didn't move for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to almost nothing. How long has Shim known about the transfer document? She swallowed. From the beginning. He designed it. You thought it was your idea. Comment guilty or innocent because this one genuinely doesn't have a clean answer. Yanhee unfolded the paper on the table, pushed it toward Jaehoon. The full network, every bribed official, every falsified document, every name. Amara stared at it and felt something cold and clarifying move through her. She had been the final piece, placed on the board without knowing she was a piece at all. She looked at Jaehoon. He was already looking at her, the specific look of a man calculating a debt he has no currency to repay. He picked up his phone, made one call. 4 words. Bring me Director Shim. Set it down, walked to the window. His shoulders rose once, fell, and Mrs. Yoon stood alone in her corner, hands folded, waiting for whatever came next with the patience of someone who had already decided the cost was worth paying. Director Shim arrived at the estate at midnight. Expensive suit, confident walk, the kind of man who had spent 40 years being untouchable and had quietly confused that with being safe. He stepped into the main hall, looked around. Jaehoon, Yanhee, Taeyoung, Amara, 6 men at every exit, and his walk became something else entirely. His cologne hit Amara before he did. Heavy, suffocating, the smell of a man who had bought his way through every room he'd ever entered. He looked at the assembled room and tried to smile. It didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. Jaehoon placed 3 items on the table: the transfer document, the photograph of Kofi, Yanhee's full testimony, signed, dated, witnessed. Then he looked at Shim the way you look at something you're deciding whether to keep or discard. You used a housekeeper's daughter as leverage. You used my son as a human shield. You placed a woman who took bullets in my house as a financial weapon. Each sentence separate, deliberate. Shim's jaw tightened. He straightened his cufflinks, actually straightened his cufflinks, and said, "You have no jurisdiction over—" Jaehoon raised one finger, just one. The room went so quiet, Amara could hear the garden lights buzzing outside. Shim stopped talking, looked at the 6 men, looked at the door, looked back at Jaehoon, and something behind his eyes finally understood that the confidence he'd walked in with was not coming home with him. His shoulders dropped, a half an inch, but everyone saw it. Comment done if that half-inch collapse satisfied something deep in your soul. Here's what Shim didn't know, and this is what makes Yanhee the most dangerous person in this entire story. She hadn't spent 3 years hiding. She'd spent 3 years building a case so complete, so surgically documented, that when she walked back into that estate, she didn't bring a warning. She brought a coffin. The Korean Financial Crimes Investigation Unit walked through the front gate at 12:17 a.m. Shim left in the back of a government vehicle, suit still perfect, hands no longer steady. A man discovering, for the first time, that the floor he'd been standing on belonged to someone else the whole time. Mrs. Yoon's daughter was found in Busan, 26, safe, alive. Mrs. Yoon didn't cry when she got the call. She just sat down very slowly in the hallway chair, put both hands over her face, and breathed. Taeyoung sat beside her without a word, just stayed, which was, if you'd been paying attention, exactly what she had done for him for 19 years. But here's what nobody said out loud. Shim hadn't worked alone. Yanhee's documents named 11 others. 3 were currently in government, 2 were judges, 1 had attended the gala and watched Amara fall. Justice had arrived tonight. The rest of it was still very much coming. 3 weeks later, Jaehoon found Amara on the back terrace. Same cold steps, same humming lights behind the walls that had never once cared what happened inside them. He sat beside her without asking, set down 2 banana milks, cheap ones. She looked at him. He looked straight ahead. The transfer stays in your name, not as a weapon, not as architecture, as a choice. He paused. I'd like to ask you, properly, when you're ready, no ring you didn't choose, no documents you didn't sign. She almost smiled. Almost. That's a very low bar. I'm working up. She didn't say yes, she didn't say no. She picked up the banana milk, felt the cold of it settle in her palm, and looked out at a garden that had finally learned to breathe, knowing that the man beside her was still, underneath everything, a man the world had not finished with yet, and that the woman in the portrait upstairs still knew things nobody had asked her yet. 11 names on that list, 3 in government, 2 judges, 1 who sat at that gala and watched Amara fall. This story isn't over. I'm just deciding whether enough of you want to see the rest of it. Subscribe and leave Season 2 in the comments. If the numbers are right, Amara's story continues.